webinar. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get started today. You will notice in the right-hand side of your screen there is a control panel. About halfway down that, there is a questions menu or a questions box. If you have questions for the gentlemen as they're making their presentation today, just type them in there, and as they call for questions throughout the webinar, we'll go ahead and read whatever questions are pre-submitted. We are also recording today's session, so for some reason, if you need to leave us, you will be able to obtain the recording. It takes about a day or so to render that, but Stephanie will be more than happy to make that available to you. With that, it is now my great pleasure to introduce to you Mr. David Nathan and Mr. Mike Frank with CALS. Mike and David?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. First, we'd like to thank Mary Scott and Stephanie and AMSA for allowing us to participate in the webinar. We appreciate everybody who's taken time on a busy Wednesday afternoon to join us, and we hope that we can provide you with some information that will help you in your moving business. Containers have really teased this generation of movers and moving companies. The tease has been that containers can and will solve all of the industry-wide problems. The challenge has been that containers have been introduced piecemeal into the industry and have not yet solved these problems. The question that needs to be asked and answered is why? Why have containers not lived up to the hype? During today's session, we will address some of the industry-wide issues, how containers can solve these problems, and what we can do together to make sure that that happens. To start the dialogue, we want to share some feedback we get each and every day, talking to big movers, talking to small movers, talking to independents, talking to van line folks, etc. I'd also like to share that our presentation today is not a linear presentation. It's not a predetermined PowerPoint presentation where we're going to be super rigid and super uniform. This is really for you folks and for us to help you make the most of the time that you're spending with us today. So if you have questions, as Mary Scott shared, you can post a question and we'll do our best to try to kind of shuck and jive and answer those questions on the fly. If not, at the end there will be a question and answer session where we'll circle back and really try to answer any questions that you have. So here's what we've learned movers are faced with each and every day. And we will go through these points once I introduce Mike Frank. Increased competition is one. More budget-sensitive customers is another. The fact that in the summer you have too much work and there's not enough capacity. And finally, in the winter you have too much capacity and not enough work. If we do a good job today during this webinar, hopefully you can get excited about how containers can solve these problems. So prior to getting into the nuts and bolts, I'm going to introduce you to Mike Frank. He is the owner of CALS Mobile Storage. We work out of our corporate office here in South Florida. We have more than 100 physical locations around the country that operate our containers, and we do have a one-way moving program where our containers can be moved around the country. And as Mike discusses not just our program, but this industry as a whole, he'll share with you kind of how you can utilize this system to make your lives better and your businesses stronger. So Mike's going to share with you a bit about our history so you know who we are and how containers changed the commercial shipping industry, and now we believe we're about to change the household goods industry as well. So with that, let me introduce you to Mike Frank.
Good morning, or good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us. We really, as David said, want to make this incredibly informative for you all. We don't want it to come across as a commercial or, particularly self-serving and promoting our company, although we're incredibly proud of what we do and how we do it. And I just want to take a couple minutes and kind of share with you all who we are. And perhaps some of the things that make us uniquely different in this industry. And probably the most important is that we are first and foremost a metal fabrication company. We've been in the container building and modification business now going on almost 20 years. And I want to share with everyone that the first decade of that business had absolutely nothing to do with what we're going to talk about today, which is residential-friendly mobile storage. What we did and where we worked was exclusively with marine containers. We're based here in Miami, Florida. Obviously, we're a pretty big international port, and we would take in large-scale marine containers, we would repair them, we would maintenance them, and we would certify them for international shipping companies. As I'm sure you all have probably observed in your travels, you always come across these yards where it seems like shipping containers are stacked up to the sky. We were one of those yards. And the reason those containers are stacked up is primarily because those are containers that are now out of service for various reasons. So we used to take containers that we had in our inventory and we would convert them into usable structures. So if you've ever dreamed, why don't they use containers for houses, or why don't they use containers for stores, or why don't they use containers to do this or do that? In our history, we have probably been approached, and in most cases probably have built something along those lines. Our real claim to fame was that we had the opportunity to work with some of the largest commercial container companies in the U.S. We were very fortunate to have a contract with Mobile Storage Group, which at the time was the second largest commercial container company in the United States. We would take containers and we would modify them for them. And again, the modifications weren't anything particularly exciting, putting in windows, putting in doors, putting in modest interiors, and creating a usable structure primarily for the construction in the commercial space. Mobile Storage Group was ultimately bought by Mobile Mini, and we started to build for Mobile Mini as well. As part of our responsibilities to these companies, they actually approached us about not only building, but also storing their containers, and we also got to the point where we actually delivered and retrieved containers on behalf of them. So we had a fleet of Landau 435 tractor trailers, tilt decks that would deliver these big 40-foot containers. We had large-scale forklifts. We tilt tray trucks, kind of like your tow truck. And so delivering, retrieving, building, modifying, and constructing containers is what we did. So as a result of such, we always had the ability to garner new customers. We did a tremendous amount of work with the U.S. military. We built a lot of support structures for our troops overseas, everything from bathrooms to showers to dormitories to commissaries to living quarters. And we were always looking on the horizon to see what the next greatest use of shipping containers was. Was it in the disaster relief market? Was it in the temporary housing market? And we became, to be very candid with you, very intrigued by what PODS was doing. We give a lot of credit to PODS. PODS, as I think probably most of you know, started in Central Florida in the Tampa Bay area, and the first couple PODS facilities were actually in Florida. So we observed a company that was now using what conventionally was a commercial product and now was using it in a residential setting. So our interest really became one of, hey, can we help? Can we build a mousetrap? Can we build a piece of equipment that could be used in this marketplace? So we started to educate ourselves, and what we found out was that not only could we build a mousetrap, but we thought we could build a better mousetrap. We saw limitations to the equipment that was being used. Either it was built too cheaply, the mechanisms for delivery and retrieval were too complicated and too expensive, and we thought we could build something simpler. That's what we set out to do. And it was much harder, it took much more work than we envisioned, but we ultimately got it done. And then once we got it done, the question is, well, what the heck do we do with it? And so we started to sell it to moving companies. And generic white, unbranded boxes, you could buy 1, you could buy 10, you could buy 100, we really didn't care. We had a nice little delivery device that we would sell you with it. They could pull with a pickup truck. And literally, you had the ability to get into the containerized part of the moving business overnight. We found that that part of the business was fairly limiting, that most movers needed some help in not only figuring out how to use containers, but in marketing them. Because the applications for containers extended well beyond just using them in the moving industry. And those are some of the things that we're going to talk to you all about today is really what are some of those uses. how do we use containers and some of the things that David had shared with you. And what we have done, and I just want to spend a couple more minutes sharing about this, is we've kind of looked at the progression of industrialization in general. And we've looked at industries that mirror the household goods industry, and we've kind of seen what they've done, and we look to see how that applies or how that can apply to the HHG industry. And probably the most relevant of those industries is international freight. And what I oftentimes like to do is just spend a minute and kind of sharing a story that I oftentimes use with folks, and that is of an average coffee plantation. And people will say, well, how does coffee relate to the household goods industry? Well, I'm going to kind of share that with you. In the old days, when folks needed to ship coffee from a plantation in Colombia to a roaster in Miami, the process was very, very manual. Literally, coffee beans were harvested out in the fields, and harvesters would carry those burlap sacks to an awaiting truck. And that waiting truck would be hand-loaded, and what would happen as a result of that truck being hand-loaded is that that truck would then be taken to a port somewhere, and those sacks would be manually loaded onto a truck, onto a ship. And some of those sacks got lost, some of those sacks got dropped, some of those sacks got affected by the environment, maybe they got affected by rodents. And so if 1,000 sacks started their journey in Colombia, by the time those sacks got to Miami, maybe there was 950 of them. Then the process happened in reverse, and so 1,000 longshoremen had to manually unload the sacks onto an awaiting ship. From the awaiting ship, it went onto a truck. That truck drove it to a roaster, and at the roaster facility, the roaster had to unload those bags by hand, and maybe now there was 930 of them. But that was an acceptable rate of loss, and it's what happened. Well, in today's day and age, what happens is that a container is delivered to the coffee plantation. And that container is loaded on site. It's loaded one time and one time only. And once that container is loaded, that container is locked at the coffee plantation. And when that container is now delivered via truck to a port, and when that container gets to the port, it's put onto a big ship, never touched by a human hand again. And when that container gets across the ocean to Miami, the container is taken off the ship, put onto another truck, and delivered to the coffee roasting facility. And at the coffee roasting facility, the container is unloaded. And if 1,000 bags went into the container, 1,000 bags come out of the container. And so I think we could probably all agree, for the sake of our conversation, that the introduction of big ISO marine containers has effectively completely transformed the movement of freight around the globe. We believe, and I think the moving industry has been teased for quite some time now, that the household goods industry is going to go through, and some may argue it is already going through, the transformation where the movement of household goods from point A to point B, whether across state, whether across country, or more importantly across the globe, could be handled the exact same way. And the beautiful thing about this transition is that it actually empowers the local mover. Because for the very first time, not only does a local mover have the capability to ship outbound, which is something that a local mover has always done throughout its career, but if set up properly, the local mover also becomes the recipient of all shipments that come inbound. So let's think about that for a minute. Going back to the coffee story, the coffee roaster ships his coffee outbound from Colombia. But the trucking company that exists in Miami, by default, becomes the recipient of that freight inbound and now has the ability to service that freight, deliver it locally, and get paid a fee to do that. So that's one of the things that we really believe in. We're really vested in the concept that we believe that a universal containerized solution as exists in the international shipping community has to exist in the household goods industry. And so, I appreciate you guys allowing me to share a little bit of the history, and I appreciate you allowing me to share a little bit of that story. Now I want to kind of segue back into kind of the meat and potatoes of this session. And one of the things that David had mentioned early on is one of the things that a lot of y'all are faced with is the concept of increased competition. And the idea is, what does that mean? What does it mean that a mover has increased competition? A lot of folks would say that means that, well, there's 5 of us in my community, there's 10 of us in our community. But we would probably argue that there's a lot more than that, because increased competition is no longer your fellow movers. Increased competition is no longer, if you're a United guy, the national guy, or if you're the national guy, the North American guy. Increased competition now means that the consumer has a lot more options to get their stuff from point A to point B. One of those options may be, I'll hire a mover, in which case all the movers are a competition. It may be that I will rent a U-Haul, in which case now all the movers have now become competitive to all the truck rental companies. It may be that I'll hire a container company, in which case now the pods and the truck rental and the movers have now all begin to compete for the same customer and the same revenue. And so we believe that if you create a component where the individual moving company has that capability, we can begin to eliminate the competition and we can begin to set you apart. And so we're going to talk about in greater detail about how, again, a container solution can set you apart from your competition along those lines. The second thing that we oftentimes talk about is we talk about the more budget-sensitive customer. So for a moment, I'm just going to segue back to David, and he's going to talk to you a little bit more about kind of the budget-sensitive customer.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. One of the things that we hear, and we really do focus a lot of our energies on getting feedback from our network, and our network is primarily moving companies and storage companies. So when we talk about these topics, it's not just because we've dreamt them up, it's because we're reacting to the needs of our dealers, which are you guys, primarily. So the more budget-sensitive customers, one of the challenges that we see that the moving industry is facing is essentially Google. So what used to be thumbing through a yellow pages or remembering the name of the family moving company in town that they've seen the truck pass by 1,000 times in traffic. It's now they can go on Google. They can Google, I'm moving and I'm in Chippewa, Idaho. And now they're subject to, as Mike mentioned, several industries, let alone companies. And one of the things that we hear about a lot are these, lowballing movers, that take people's stuff hostage and will lowball the reputable pro mover, the AMSA member that is well vetted and has insurance and is usually, or I shouldn't say usually, but often generational in the moving industry. And what we find is that for a moving company to have these several solutions available, and solutions, let's talk primarily budget, that if somebody calls that local moving company, that reputable pro mover, really the only reason that customer would leave you is because they can't afford you. And so what we have found is that the most effective...
sorry, please. It's okay if I just can interrupt for a second. I would say that fundamentally, that's the number one reason. It typically, I talk to moving companies every day, as I'm sure Mary Scott does as well. But if you ask a mover, what is the single reason, if you had to rank reasons, what is the single reason that when a customer makes an inquiry, they don't select you? I would say that a very, very, very high percentage of movers will say singularly, it's because of the price. The customer just could not afford my service.
It could also be that it's a timing issue. You know, it's a provision of service. So let's say they can afford you, but it's June, and they're moving because they're taking a new job, and they have to move from Jacksonville to Portland, and they have to do it in a week. Well, the ability of most moving companies to put a truck under that move, pretty tough. So again, the introduction of a solution that can be cost effective and meet the service need of a typical client is really where containers can play a major role. And you know, one of the things that we mentioned at the top is this, you know, is this plenty of business but not enough capacity in the summer. That also has to do with the provision of service, being able to meet a customer's not just budget but their timing. Then when we get back, you know, circle back around, summertime, pretty easy. Let's get as many customers as we can, and some will fall by the wayside. Now we also have the winter.
Right, and in the winter, it's a whole different set of challenges. And the challenges in the winter is that how do you manage your need for capacity in the summer with the potential of having overcapacity in the winter? How do you add extra trucks if you know that those trucks are not going to be working in this winter? How do you add extra staff to only know that as you get into the winter season, you're going to have to lay them off? And so what we call the ebb and flow, or what we call the peaks and valleys of the moving industry, becomes very, very difficult for a local mover to manage. You want the ability to make more money in the summer, but you don't want to simply spend all the money you've made in the summer supporting overhead in the winter. And so the question becomes is, what do you do with it? And one of the things that we've learned, again, not by being experts, but by being students of the industry, is that we have to be creative in terms of where we look for the additional work. And one of the things that containers can do, and a lot of movers are beginning to look in this area, is that how do you use labor? How do you use transport devices? And in what capacity can you use them? So one thing that a lot of movers get into is they get into home delivery. So during the summer months, they'll do household goods stuff, and in the winter months, they'll do home delivery services for big box retailers, for appliance stores, for mattress companies. It's using their resources in a different capacity. And so one of the things that we very, very much help with is, what is that capacity? Where are areas that you can use your skill set, and where can a container help you gain entry into that market? How do you develop relationships with home stagers? How do you develop relationships with senior move managers? How do you develop relationships with remediation companies? How do you develop relationships with Christmas tree stands? How do you develop relationships with pumpkin patches and fireworks stands? How do you develop layaway and holiday storage programs with the Walmarts and the Kmarts and the big box retailers and small box retailers? Again, stuff that inherently makes sense, but is not uniquely something you do each and every day. And something that takes a lot of time to do, and the challenge is to garner that type of activity. You got to do the work in the summer to get the work in the, you got to do the legwork in the summer to get the real work in the fall. The challenge is you don't have the time during the summer to do the legwork in the fall. So these are all the kind of things that we have learned a container solution can really, really provide. And again, just to kind of recap those things, because I think it's pretty important that we kind of review them and go over them, is that the everyday mover that has a brick and mortar facility, that has an investment in trucks, that has an investment in equipment, and that has an investment in people, is facing increasing competition. And in often cases, that competition provides a more cost-attractive solution to the customer. You have to have that solution in your inventory in order for you to remain relevant. Containers does that. Number two, you're going to have customers that are just simply going to be shopping on price and not necessarily on quality. And no matter how much you bitch and moan about quality, at the end of the day, if you're significantly more expensive, they don't listen to you. So you have to have a solution that meets their lower budget. Containers provide you that entry-level, attractive product that you can offer a customer so they don't walk out your door and go down the street. Containers provides that solution. 3, in the summer, you need more capacity, and you need unlimited capacity. And that doesn't always mean more trucks, because oftentimes, particularly if you're a van line person, although you love your van line and we love van lines as well, van lines cannot always help you. So what happens as a result of that? You're tying up equipment, you're bringing inventory back to your warehouses, you're tying up valuable real estate, and you're spinning so many wheels that at the end of the day, you don't know if you're making money or losing money. To be able to take a load at a residence, stuff it in a container, lock that container and ship that container when, and only when your van line can't, helps your van line because it gets off their docket, helps the customer because you don't have a mad customer, and helps you because you touched the stuff once. Containers can provide that solution. And fourthly, when the whole dust of the summer months subside and you're now left with what the heck do I do from October through February, let's look at a new line of work, yet related, on how not necessarily trucks, but how containers can help you attract and keep new customers. And so we have found that, and particularly here at Cows, and again, I told you I didn't want this to be self-serving, but I'm going to give a little push. One of the things that we have become very, very good at is helping you realize and implement all 4 of those steps. And one of the things that David had spoken about earlier when he opened this webinar is he talked about the tease of containers and the fact that containers have been in and around the household goods industry for a number of years now, and it really hasn't taken off on a large-scale basis. We believe the reason it hasn't taken off on a large-scale basis is because there has not yet been a comprehensive program that hits all of those points. And so I just want to think in for a second. It's not so much who can build containers. You know, we have a 125,000 square foot manufacturing facility down here in Miami, Florida. We weld them, that we build them here in the United States. We don't bring units in from Asia. But at the end of the day, and again, this is going to sound self-defeating, but at the end of the day, that doesn't even matter. What matters is if you have a piece of equipment and you know how to use it, it's a great piece of equipment. If at the end of the day you have a piece of equipment and you don't know how to use it, it's a terrible investment. And what we've learned, again, by being students of the industry, is that there is yet to be a container system out there available to household goods movers that, number 1, is cost effective, number 2, is affordable, and number 3, provides the support to help a mover use it, not to be a proud owner of containers, but to use it to generate money in all 4 of the areas that we have described. So, you know, the idea here is that the industry is going to go in that direction. The industry has tried. I think it has probably more momentum now than it has ever had. And the question becomes is that, are you content with struggling through the issues that you struggle through? Or are you visionary enough to be able to say, you know what, this industry is evolving, I need to evolve with it. And so, you know, again, to come full circle, I want to talk about my coffee story for a second. Back in the day, you could go to any port in the world, and there were thousands of longshoremen. As a matter of fact, most people heard of longshoremen. You go to a port today, you'd be hard-pressed to see a person. I want to bring that fast forward to a moving industry company. You can go to a moving company and see lots of people in the summer. You can go to the same moving company in the winter and see very few people. The idea is that an owner of a moving company, as a high-ranking official in a moving company, we have to understand that the industry is morphing to a point where the transaction can be delivered and the transaction can be fully consummated at the consumer level. The ability for a container to be brought to a consumer's house, whether it's a big shipment or, more importantly, a small shipment, which it's very, very useful for, that container can be loaded at the consumer house without any specialty equipment, without any big trucks. That container can be locked at the consumer house. And the next time the stuff is seen is at the consumer's house at the destination side, it eliminates all of those issues that now kind of bottle up our industry. And so again, like the way of the longshoreman, if someone bet their future on the fact that I'm going to be a longshoreman for life, they're probably out doing another job today. If your bet is that I'm going to be a mover for life and I'm going to continue to work in the old model, we might find that you have another job in the future. And so what we'd like to do is again, thank everyone for their time, thank everybody for listening, and really be a resource. So for those that are considering adding containers, David or I or anyone on our staff would love to be a resource for you. For those that want to buy and purchase and own containers on a local level, there are a lot of great solutions out there independent of us, and we'd love to share pros and cons with you. Anyone that is looking to use containers as an active mechanism to move locally and to move long distance, we think we provide a great solution, and we'd love to talk to you about what we have. But more importantly, we'd love for you to embrace the concept that containers are our friends, that containers are in fact going to change this industry, that containers are going to come. It's nothing that I can stop or prevent. It's nothing that anyone on this call can stop or prevent. And so the question is, how can we cost effectively as individual business owners embrace containers, add containers, and most importantly, use them as a tool to make more money? And if we can do that, I think we've done a great job at sharing kind of the container vision with you all. Anything else?
You know, we'd like to turn it back over to Mary Scott. Again, this is David again. I'd like to thank everybody for being a part of the presentation. If there are any questions that you might want to present on the webinar, that's great. Or I'll just reiterate Mike's comment that we are available. Feel free to check out our website. We have recently renovated it, so it's nice and fast and has a lot of pretty pictures on it. And I guess other than that, we would turn this back over to Mary Scott to wrap up.
Okay, gentlemen, we have had one question come through at this point. Just as a reminder, if you do have questions, on the right-hand side in your control panel, there is a questions menu, and just feel free to type in your questions. But the one that has come through so far is, can you very quickly re-summarize the 4 steps?
Yes. So the 4 things that we talk about primarily are the increasing competition that a moving company faces. And again, I want to be detailed in that increasing competition is not from the renegade mover. It's not from the other van line guy across town. The increased competition is from that plus all of the above. And all of the above includes all the other solutions that are now available to consumers simply by going on the internet. Is it a moving broker that they don't know about? Is it a rental truck company? Is it a independent container company? Is it a trailer company? There are lots and lots and lots of solutions that consumers can look to save money to move. That is, in fact, the increasing competition that a local, and as David said, oftentimes generational mover is facing. We want to help you get that business back by providing all of those solutions to that consumer under one roof. The second is the budget-sensitive customer, the customer that just doesn't believe that a full-service mover is worth what they're charging because they see that they can rent a truck for $19.95 or $29.95 a day, although we all know that's not the whole price. That's the price that hooks them. And when that price is $29.95 a day and your price is $300 or $400 or $500, the gap is so large that the uneducated consumer just doesn't even give you consideration. So we need to give you tools where you have an entry point to that same consumer at that same price, and then once you have them, you have the ability to educate them. Again, we can help you with that, share that with you, but that's the more budget-sensitive consumer. And that also extends to the nature of our society. The society is younger, and so they think they're smarter. They think they can use technology better, and the industry is kind of old school. The third is capacity. When we're really busy, we want the ability to make more money. The only way we can make more money is with more ability to move stuff. And so we want to help you and give you the ability to be able to move more stuff when you're busy so you can make more money. And the fourth step is how to make more money when you're not busy. What do you do with the resources that you already own to be able to go after those customers that aren't conventional moving customers, but still you can monetize and still use the resources that you have already invested in during the slower fall and winter months? And we want to help you with that as well. So, and again, these are things that we've learned. Doesn't mean that we're not going to learn more things, but by talking to movers each and every day, these are the four biggest challenges that we hear. And so we've crafted and developed a program that account for each of these four items.
Did that answer the question, Mary Scott?
I think it did brilliantly. We've had another question come through, and it is, what about lot space? Can you help movers find additional real estate to store empty containers or containers that are not at residence or in the process of transit?
Well, that's a really interesting question, and the blunt answer is you do require a certain amount of space for inventory, but again, speaking from a cow's perspective, if there is an overage, let's say that you need 20 containers just totally making up numbers. You need 20 containers actively working in your business during June, but in December, you really only need 5. The trick is not just finding empty lot space that becomes an additional expense that you need to, to put these containers, but to find a way at the very worst to be in a break-even situation, providing overflow storage, as Mike mentioned earlier, to a Walmart, to a Kmart, to a local CVS that has all of their, party supplies, for two or 3 months.
And let me just, again, provide a complement to that answer. The other thing about container models in general, and this is actually a misconception, I'm glad, thank you for whoever brought up this question, but one of the misconceptions of the industry is that containers, in order to be effective, in order for them to make money, have to be at a certain scale. And most people think of a PODS facility. You've driven down the road and you've seen this giant warehouse with containers stacked everywhere. There are containers inside the building, there's containers outside the building, and your limitation is, well, crap, I don't have that much space, I can't get into the container business. And in most models that are out there, most of the franchise models that are out there, they follow a very similar model. You got to have lots of containers out in the field making money in order for that to be cost effective, to make a return on investment or an ROI. Again, this will sound a little self-serving, so I'm going to preface it. The way we've designed the COWS model is we've designed the model to start very slowly. So with nothing more than a dozen or so containers, somebody can get into the container business, add containers to their existing business, we share it with you, become part of our international network, and allow that small footprint of containers, essentially the equivalent of 6 to 8 parking spots worth of space, to make money. Now, once it's making money, you can make a very good decision as a businessman. I'm going to assume that the people on this call are business people. What do I do? Am I making more money with my containers than I am with my trucks? And maybe instead of having 20 trucks, I should have 10 trucks. And with the space that I gain back by getting rid of 10 trucks that are in my parking lot all the time, I can triple the amount of money I'm making. But let's do that not based on a pretty performer, let's do that on practical experience. So we have a model that allows a mover to get in at a very small level. And for that, at that level, to become cash flow positive. And you know what? The best example is I got to go out and make space because I have way too many containers that are making me way too much money. That's an easy problem for us to solve. So yes, we can help you with that. We have a network. We know a lot of moving companies, and sometimes, even if we have a dealer in a marketplace, sometimes we create a matchmaker program where even though the mover that's in the marketplace is our dealer, he has a relationship with maybe who was his competitor, because his competitor really has the same problem. That is, I got a small load from Mrs. Jones going to Dubuque. I don't have a way to get it there. You know what, Johnny, you've told me about these containers forever. Can I use one of those cows and get this 2,000 pounds off my dock, and maybe we split the money together? So all of a sudden you've now not only created a solution for yourself, but you created a solution for your competitors, and now you have friendly competition. And oftentimes, throw a couple containers in their yard because they have a much bigger yard. It's a relationship we help with. So sorry for the long-winded answer, but there was a lot to it.
All right, so, yeah. Thank you. And one last question before we let everyone go today. Can you make the presentation available to the attendees?
Is that a question for us or for you?
No, that's for you. Can you make the slide presentation available to the attendees? Or basically, can you send it to me and I'll send it to everybody?
Yeah, well, when we let off, and I actually started off with this, it may not have been clear, and I apologize for that. We purposefully did not create a linear PowerPoint presentation just in case there were questions in between to be kind of free-flowing. But I'll go one step further. Again, outside of what necessarily might be considered a sales arena, if somebody truly has interest in either picking our brain or listening to this type of presentation, we could personalize that presentation for that particular moving company and talk to them on the phone and go through maybe a screen sharing. So we will make ourselves available to any AMSA member for that, not to help gain that knowledge.
Right, and just to take it a step further, guys, just so you know, and also provide a very comprehensive and what I'll call as non-biased evaluation of other alternatives that you may have heard of or you may have considered. There are other alternatives out there that are excellent as well, but they're right for the right application.
Right.
And again, not sounding self-serving, we obviously think ours is the best. That's why we do what we do. But there are others out there that are pretty darn good too. And so, if someone wants to call us and create a friendly challenge and say, hey, look, I've considered XYZ company before. Here's why I'm interested. Here's why I didn't do it. Tell me why I should or why I shouldn't. We're happy to provide that type of evaluation services, particularly to AMSA members.
Okay, thank you. Well, I will definitely pass this gentleman's information along to you, and vice versa, I will pass your information along to the gentleman. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. And David and Mike, thank you for just an incredible amount of information. This was a wonderful, wonderful presentation that begins to open up all kinds of information on alternate capacities. If you are interested or if questions occur to you as you walk away from the webinar, please feel free to email me the questions, and I will be only too happy to see that they are forwarded on to David and Mike. And David and Mike, thank you guys for joining us this afternoon. And I hope everyone will join us next Wednesday for the new Pro Mover logo launch and what the new Pro Mover logo can do for you. So with that, thank you, and everyone have a great afternoon.
Great, thank you.
Does it mean we have to go back to work now?
To your boss.
Okay.
And since he's in the room, I'd say probably yeah. All right, thank you.